exactly. If you want, I can wave my hand for you. No, you can manage yourself. Okay, perfect. Thank you. You don't need to use up all of that. It's just for you, but just a limit.
We're planning an hour because we're going to have lunch together at half 12. Maybe an hour is enough. I'm very happy to. We'll see because sometimes the audience are shy; they don't ask questions. So then we can see audience is asking lots of questions, and if not, then you can ask them more your questions.
And it will become available on YouTube. But if you want to have the audio of the question as well, then
To do the microphone.
and to pick one microphone. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, if not, better to repeat the question, then we have it.
Understood. My first time. Pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, I am enjoying it. I have like a map in my office of like all the places I've visited, which is really. Yeah, exactly.
There is also, you have already one? You want to have a Eluado as well?
Good.
Prego, confesso.
Jó napot kívánok, kedves nézőink, kedves közönségünk! Köszöntök mindenkit itt Gombaszögön, a gombaszögi nyári táborban, a Paraméter hírportál szervezésében megvalósuló beszélgetésen. Engem Juhász Lászlónak hívnak, a vendégünk pedig az Egyesült Királyság pozsonyi nagykövete, Bilal Zahid úr. Welcome.
Ďakujem pekne.
A beszélgetés angol nyelven zajlik, aki nem bírja megfelelő szinten az angol nyelvet, akkor annak rendelkezésére állnak itt fülhallgatók, tolmácsberendezés, úgyhogy magyarra tolmácsolja a kollégám az egész beszélgetést. A végén pedig akár magyarul is föl lehet tenni a kérdéseket, de természetesen akár angolul is. It was about Hungarian language, because not everyone speaks English here. But everyone speaks Hungarian here. This is, as you know, a place where ethnic Hungarians meet, especially young people, some of them maybe having two identities. Some of them think that they're Hungarians, some of them they believe that they're both Hungarians and Slovaks. You have Pakistani roots, and you were brought up in Northern Ireland. So that's, may I ask you, what do you consider to be your identity on a personal note?
Thank you. Jó napot, dobrý den, ďakujem veľmi pekne za pozvanie. Thank you so much for this invitation. And as you said, this is my first time at Gombaszög, so it's an absolute pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I was born in Northern Ireland. United Kingdom has 4 nations. So lots of people were asking me, do I support England football team? Of course I do, but I'm from Northern Ireland, and actually Northern Ireland were playing Slovakia in the World Cup qualifiers. So I think the first thing to say is the United Kingdom has always been a diverse country, both because of our 4 nations, but also because of the Commonwealth and countries including Pakistan that were part of the British Empire in the past, but are now part of the Commonwealth since they left the British Empire. And because of that, we have large populations from across the world who made the UK their home. So my grandparents moved to England, and then my father and mother, at a very young age, decided to move to Northern Ireland. in the 70s, which was quite an interesting time to move to Northern Ireland because of the troubles happening at the time. But they fell in love with the beauty of the place and the nature. So it's quite a long way of answering your question, Laszlo, in terms of my identity. I think I would describe it in many ways. So, of course, I'm British. I'm the British ambassador, and I identify as British, but also I identify as Northern Irish. Sometimes if I'm watching rugby and sport, I will identify as Irish because the Ireland team is kind of both north and south of Ireland. So I think it depends on the situation, but I think the really important thing is that there's nothing kind of stopping me kind of legally or culturally from identifying the way I want to. And I think that's something we can explore in this discussion, and something that was quite important in Northern Ireland with the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1998, that people in Northern Ireland, they are entitled to identify as British, Irish, or both.
Let's just stay for a while in Northern Ireland. And what was the most difficult part of this whole reconciliation that we refer to as the peace process or this agreement? And do you think there are any lessons that we could learn maybe as a minority here in Slovakia from what has happened in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the way you described the question, you talked about peace process and agreement. I think that's quite important to recognize that it is a process. So even though in 1998 we had that Good Friday Agreement, since then there have been various disruptions to the peace process where the government has collapsed. So we had to come up with new agreements since then to resolve certain issues. So I think that that's the first thing to say is, that it's a process. It will, even at the moment, there are still disagreements about how we deal with the past and how we remember the past and recognize what happened. So even today, and I think, for a long time, there will be debates about this issue. And as a government, we are trying to resolve that. So that's difficult. But I think, in terms of lessons, I think one of the first is definitely appreciating that it is a process, that you cannot, have an agreement and then just, think that's it and just sort of, not put attention and care into ensuring that agreement is implemented. So I think that's the first thing, a key lesson. And maybe, thinking about kind of minority communities and like the Hungarian minority, perhaps it's about recognizing that, even though you have to constantly work on this, for Hungarian minority communities in Slovakia and other minority communities all over the world, it's important that they are able to kind of have their kind of rights fulfilled, and we keep track of that.
And I don't really want to push this subject very much, but do you think you could also be an example of how to preserve our identity without becoming isolated?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of part of that, and I think this festival is a really good example because, you have lots of Hungarian speakers, but you have people like me from the UK and people from other backgrounds and from Slovakia enjoying this festival and enjoying Hungarian culture. So I think a key thing is ensuring that it's not just seen as for the minority community, that actually they have something to contribute to wider society, whether it's through their music, their food, their culture, their language. It's all enriching kind of society as a whole. So it's not just about, and it's important that it's there to protect your rights and your culture and language, but at the same time, it's an incredible language, it's an incredible culture, and I think people can enrich their lives from learning more about that and enjoying that.
Here in Slovakia, Hungarians and Slovaks sometimes argue on historical questions. They see history from a different viewpoint. Hungarians do, and Slovaks also. Do you think a reconciliation or a peace could be achieved without reaching a shared vision of history, or is it enough to agree on a shared future, say?
I mean, I think it's the latter. I think it's about having that kind of shared vision of the future, and I think that's kind of a key lesson from my experience in Northern Ireland, is that there was agreement that we don't want to kind of go to the past, and however people define that or tell the story of what happened, I think it's really important everyone is able to tell the story and their own sometimes very personal stories about what happened. But as you kind of described it in your question, it's about having that shared kind of vision for the future. Sometimes it's not enough, and as we know, for example, in South Africa, there was a need to set up a truth and reconciliation process. In Northern Ireland, we've started that process as well. So, for sometimes you do need to acknowledge what happened in the past and create a process for that. But I think the key thing to kind of get from discussion and debate over to agreement and getting it over the line and moving forward is kind of having that kind of shared vision and future.
Are there any mistakes that we could learn from Northern Ireland, or not to learn but to avoid?
Okay.
Of course, we would have to learn the mistakes first to be able to avoid them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think or maybe we could describe them as lessons. I think because there's numerous lessons I would consider. I mean, one of them for me, in my time, I worked in Northern Ireland policy, and a key lesson for me was the importance of relationships and relationships between politicians and leaders to be able to build that trust between them to reach that consensus, because sometimes it takes that step and that courage. So investing in those relationships, I think, was a key thing. And sometimes when that went wrong, or there wasn't that kind of relationship between leaders or politicians, it was difficult to reach that consensus.
Let's move from the Northern Ireland to the Ukraine, because you also worked in Ukraine at a mission. What it was during the war already? What was what was the image of the war, or the face of the war, that you remember the most?
So as you say, I worked in Ukraine for a year and a half during the war. The full-scale invasion, of course, we had Crimea in 2014 and Donbass. I think for me, the overriding memory I have is the resilience of the Ukrainian people and their incredible ability, with the support of the international community, with the support of Slovakia and Hungary. They were able to not just defend themselves against Russia's full-scale invasion, but also continue to grow and to innovate. Some of that we've seen on the battlefield with their drone technology, but also in cities. So I would mainly work in Kiev and also Lviv, and each time I would go back, or I'd maybe go on holiday and come back, there's kind of a new cafe, something new opening. Always that innovation, that drive for the Euro-Atlantic future was so incredible despite the war. I say this is with the huge caveat that I lived, unfortunately, in a bubble in Kiev, because of the war. As diplomats, like many diplomats and other international organizations, we were very restricted in what we could do. So my experience of of living kind of during the war would be very different to someone living kind of in the east of the country or the north or some places of the occupied south. So, I was sort of like a bubble. So I had some insight with the drone attacks and missile attacks, but it was a very different experience to some of what others would have experienced.
In a recent interview, you said that Putin has made a big mistake or a strategic mistake by invading the Ukraine. Could you elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, really has. And if you look at the numbers, I think it's over 100,000 Russian soldiers, Russian lives, young men and women, have been lost because of Putin's decision to unprovoked launch his full-scale invasion. Also, Russia's economy has really suffered, and even today we're noticing it with the fuel shortages. They're using up different kinds of fuel, which is kind of wrecking the cars, and it's kind of creating, I think, domestic problems for him. So I think it's a huge mistake, and he thought he could take Kiev in a day, and the Ukrainians have proven that to be completely wrong. And even now on the battlefield, they are making progress. So I think it was a mistake by Putin to think that the Ukrainians would just surrender their nationhood by his illegal invasion, and he's paying with the consequences of that.
You mentioned that Slovakia has helped Ukraine a lot, and I do know that you have traveled a lot throughout Slovakia, and you always meet with people, meet with young people. How do you see, or what's your impression how young Slovaks see this war?
So it's a good question, and I think my impression, at least the young people I've met, is a great deal of empathy. So, since the full-scale invasion, a lot of young people fled into Slovakia, and now they are in schools in Slovakia and even learning the language and kind of are fluent in Slovak language. So I think kind of young people, when they kind of hear these personal stories of young people like themselves who had to leave school, who cannot go back and visit kind of family and relatives in Ukraine, there's a great deal of empathy for what the Ukrainian people have gone through. And, I think kind of just more generally as well, as you mentioned, since I started my role in September, I've had the privilege of traveling right across this beautiful country, and including to the southern most parts of Slovakia, where I've met people from Hungarian minorities. I've traveled kind of in the east, kind of north, all over. And I see kind of all these examples of how communities have also supported Ukrainians, whether it is through opening their homes to the Ukrainian people, providing logistical support, fundraising for ambulances, like small things that all contribute towards the sense that actually Slovak people kind of are strong supporters of their neighbors.
I have a strange feeling that this war is, our neighbor is at war. But still, sometimes I feel, and sometimes when I talk to people, they feel that it's still far from us. The war going on in Ukraine is far from us. Why do you think this should matter to us?
I think, firstly, it matters in terms of our principles. So we should wholeheartedly reject the breaking of international law, and I think if we are not kind of strong supporters of Ukraine and ensuring there's a just and lasting peace, and the United Kingdom together with France, we are co-chair the Coalition of the Willing with a number of other countries to look at how we can support Ukraine to have that just and lasting peace. So I think kind of firstly, you know, as a matter of principle, it's really important that we don't we don't let kind of Russia win. I think of secondly, it's not far away. So even though, you know, the missiles and drones, you know, are hundreds of miles away, I think kind of we are living in a time when actually the distinction between kind of warfare is it's less black and white. I think we're living in a grey zone where we have a different kind of threat. It's not just, of course, it is kind of a physical threat, but it's also a hybrid threat, whether it's through cyber, disinformation, sabotage. We see examples of that in Poland. We see examples of that in other countries as well. It's sometimes non-state actors. Sometimes Russia is behind it as well. We have done attributions. So actually, as part of I think we're living in a grey zone when it comes to some of the hybrid threat we're seeing, as well as the physical threat.
We often hear that young people are vulnerable to disinformation and fake news and this stuff, but they are also better equipped than old people to fight it. What's your opinion on this?
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? That we are kind of on our hands. We can just, you know, get information like that and algorithms, and so I think as you kind of describe it, it's a double-edged sword. So I think kind of we young people, even you know, older generations are susceptible to disinformation, misinformation, but equally, you know, we have the tools, and tools are being developed by different organizations to look at how they can combat and kind of and identify misinformation, disinformation. So I think it's always evolving. I think it'll be a constant battle in the information space. But what I think is really key is the ability to have critical thinking. So being able to read something or watch something and just step back and think for yourself whether that's true or not, and have that debate, have that discussion, have that sometimes internal critique, or sometimes with your friends or in the school. You know, is what I'm reading, is that correct? Is that true? So I think that's kind of really key, is ensuring that we continue that critical thinking. And it's interesting you kind of allude to technology as well, and I think there's a live debate happening, including in the UK, and indeed I think in Slovakia with the Minister for Education, about the extent to which we put more protections around how young people access information online.
Right. Just one more thing came to my mind about the war. This war will end one day, but what do you think would be the greatest challenge for European diplomacy afterwards?
Oh, it's a great question. I think, as you said, this war will end, and we hope it ends soon. And it's a just and lasting peace. I think a key challenge will be, I think, political, and ensuring that we keep up the momentum on European defence. So we had the NATO summit take place over a week ago in Ankara, and I think it was a success in terms of demonstrating NATO unity, support for Ukraine. But also it was a really important signal about European partners kind of stepping up their contribution and their role in NATO. The UK is doing that through our defence spending. We announced our defence investment plan, and other countries, including Slovakia and Hungary, signalled their commitment to the alliance, but crucially their commitment to European security. I think often as well there's a perception of, when we talk about kind of security and defence, in a way that it's about war, it's about, you know, kind of hard security. So I think there's something there about for our leaders and our politicians to explain to the general public why defence is important, because increasing defence spending, we don't have trees that grow money. We need to kind of make quite difficult decisions, and in the UK, you know, those difficult decisions are being made as we look at increasing our defence spending by billions of pounds. That will require difficult decisions. So I think there's a challenge as well about kind of demonstrating kind of why peace matters, and we need to invest in defence, because the cost of war is so significant, and it's not just human lives, it's the economy as well.
You talked about the cost of war, and I want to ask you about the cost of Brexit. It has just been 10 years since the referendum. It was just in June 2016. And this is, after Brexit, people began to look at the UK in a different way, maybe. And what do you think the perception of the UK has shifted to, and how would the UK would show itself, or what is the picture that you would like to like us to see when looking at the UK?
Yeah, yes, as you said, it's been 10 years since the referendum and the result, and I was working in Northern Ireland at the time, which obviously got borders Ireland, so it was a huge, significant moment, and I remember it vividly. And I think your question about perception, I think it's changed over time. So I think kind of, you know, initially, you know, it was kind of shock, it was disappointment probably for many European allies, to I think an acceptance that this was a democratic decision that we now need to implement. But crucially, you know, as we were discussing before, thinking about kind of our future with the European Union, I would say that by kind of adding a few points about the fact that while we're not part of the European Union, we are still part of Europe. We are Europe. UK is part of Europe. It's not part of the European Union as an entity, and the European Union itself is evolving, and there's debate about expansion and other countries joining. So I think kind of the Union as a political entity, economic entity, is evolving, but also so is our relationship. And you know, my message would be that, you know, the UK, you know, we are kind of a European country, and we have reset the relationship with Europe. So last year, our Prime Minister, we had the first EU-UK summit. This is under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is leaving on Monday. So we have a new Prime Minister, but I know that new Prime Minister is committed to delivering the manifesto as well. So he will have the same position, that we want to reset the relationship with Europe. But crucially, we are seeing concrete examples of that, whether it's kind of our cooperation on Erasmus, Horizon, but also just earlier this week on Monday, we could have joined the EU Ukraine fund, the loan program for Ukraine. At the same time as well, we coordinated with EU on cyber sanctions. So we are doing, I think we're kind of seeing examples of that kind of new relationship with the EU after the reset.
What is your answer when you're asked about all the positive things that Brexit has brought to UK? So what are the positive sides of Brexit?
So I think one thing I observed after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I was working in our headquarters as one of the additional directors in our department, and we were able to move as a country not part of the EU, and we were able to move very quickly on sanctions. So, you know, as a country, we were able to move quite quickly on kind of sanctions. We went quite hard, also kind of on our military support to Ukraine. So we had that element of freedom, but at the same time, we coordinated with our EU partners, and we're able to share information with them so for the 27 to have their sanctions package. So there was coordination, but definitely like that one example sticks to me, is that we had that flexibility to move quickly and fast.
Okay, and it wouldn't have been possible if you had stayed in Europe, in the European Union, because of all the administrative things that the EU entitles.
I think it definitely would have been possible, but we were just able to move quicker. So obviously, as a 28, then we would have had to negotiate and deliver the package. Whereas as a country outside the bloc, we were able to move quickly. So it would have been possible, but I think we were able to move fast. But it's hard to, compare counterfactual.
What has Brexit changed in the everyday relationship between the UK and Slovakia, or British and Slovaks?
I mean, it's a hypothetical question. I mean, I suppose I wasn't here before. I think one area which I recognise, and you mentioned I travel a lot around Slovakia, especially when I speak to young students, is it's more challenging for young people to study in the UK and vice versa. So I think that's one area where I think, and the current negotiations are happening around how we could have a closer relationship, particularly for young people who I think, frankly speaking, have noticed a difference. So
that's the future of Erasmus.
Yeah, Erasmus is a really good example. So I meet people of my generation who kind of benefited from Erasmus and were able to study, whereas now, you either have to have kind of a lot of money and rich parents, or have to fundraise, to study. And there are programs and grants available, but I think that's a bit more of a challenge. But I think overall, actually, I think the ties between the UK and Slovakia remain strong. We have a really strong history. The people-to-people links are strong. The Slovak diaspora is, I think, the second largest in the UK. And we have a large population of Brits who live here in Slovakia as well. So I think the people-to-people connections, I think, remain strong, and I think there's lots of areas we cooperate on which we could talk for hours about. So I do acknowledge that there are some issues we need to work through, and we are working on them, and we are committed to working on them. But generally speaking, I think the people-to-people and government-to-government links and business-to-business remain strong, and I think are growing.
Brexit is a closed chapter, if we look at this way, but it's also evolving. The relationship between the UK and Europe is evolving. How do you see the pace and the direction of this evolvement? I know that you don't own a crystal globe, so you can't see into the future, but what should or what will change in the relationship between your country and the European Union?
So I think, obviously it's been a process. So since Brexit, we had the withdrawal agreement. So I think, and some of that was quite, it was a challenge to negotiate that. I was involved in some of the chapters. But I think now, crucially, we're building that relationship. I think particularly on security and defence cooperation, I think that's one area. Together as part of as NATO allies as well, is an area. I think in terms of pace, the next milestone will be the next EU-Ukraine or EU-UK summit, which was due to take place in this late summer, but of course we're having a change of prime minister, so I expect it will take place after the summer, hopefully soon after. So I think that will be an important summit because it...
Do you expect any significant changes or decisions on this summit?
Yeah, I hope so. So there's a number of files we're negotiating, which were kind of recognised in the previous summit, including in the areas of cooperation for business, for people-to-people links, and a number of other areas. So I hope there'll be kind of more progress in those files. I think the summit is quite a good way to kind of focus minds towards having some concrete outcomes.
Regardless of Brexit, what are the most important areas of cooperation that are flourishing between Slovakia and the UK?
So for me, as an ambassador, I have 3 main priorities in terms of our relationship with Slovakia. So firstly, it's working with the UK and Slovakia to have a more secure security and defence cooperation, and that's kind of military to military as kind of NATO. Also kind of in wider kind of security areas, whether that's kind of cyber cooperation, information, disinformation. So quite a broad kind of area of work. The second is around making both our countries more prosperous and growing our economies. So that's a big focus for the UK government, and I know for the Slovak government as well. And that's both business to business, but also looking at how we can make it easier for our businesses and our people to do work. And then the third is people to people. I think that's flourishing in a number of areas, including our cooperation with civil society groups in Slovakia. I know that the embassy in the UK is also doing work with the Slovak population who live in the UK.
It's very interesting and very important, I think, what you just said, the people and people relations. So how is it possible to make it more relevant for young people, the British Slovak relations? How can they be more relevant and not only for politicians and government and businesses? Why or how to make it interesting or relevant for us?
Yeah, I think one thing I think helps is language. So lots of people here speak Hungarian language, and that enables that cooperation to be able to live and work. So I've seen great examples of English language teaching, and we have the British Council in Slovakia that have different programs on English language. And I was in Mrmavska Sobota yesterday and noticed a British language school there as well. So I think definitely language helps, and I think it opens up opportunities for young people then to consider doing maybe a study program or even after study going to work in the UK. So I think language is definitely helpful. But I think nowadays, I think young people are able to look beyond their borders and their communities. I think now we live in such a digital age that unlike when I was growing up, it was difficult to imagine living or visiting somewhere abroad. Whereas now I think there's just so many more connections and opportunities for young people to do that, both physically but also in a virtual sense.
Are there any fields that where Slovakia is more important to the UK than people would think?
Interesting question. Any particular fields? I think one area is definitely around innovation and technology. We have some really great examples of that across Slovakia in terms of Slovak talent in the IT space and sector. I visited Košice a few months ago. I visited numerous times, but my first time I visited, I met IT Valley, who've got their own an IT Valley in Košice, and I met some incredible people, including IT, which is a program we support for women who work in the IT sector. So women and girls is also a priority for us as an embassy. So I think that there we have a lot to kind of learn and collaborate with Slovak entrepreneurs and innovators in the space of IT and technology.
What fields of cooperation between our countries deserve or would deserve more attention?
I mean, I would, if I had a magic wand, I would want kind of more attention on everything. You know, I think Slovakia and UK have great potential. So I think, you know, we want to do more. We'd love to do more across kind of all sectors. I mean, earlier we talked about the big challenge around security and NATO. So I think that's one area where we are. I think particularly after the NATO summit last week, I think all members, all allies are focusing more on that area.
I'm very positively surprised how many young people are among our audience. Do you come across it very often, or do you also feel that young people are less and less interested in politics, and what could be done to change it or change this direction?
Yeah, it's great to see lots of people here. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a live question, even in the UK, in terms of how do you, define politics? What is politics? You know, I think sometimes it's perceived as what they see in the television when they see, you know, politicians debating and having arguments,
right,
and sort of
like party politics.
Well, party political, and I think some young people, for any people regardless of age, that could be quite off-putting, and then there's disengagement, and you know, I think kind of one concern, you know, for unfortunately in the world we live in, there's a lot of online abuse and threats towards politicians as well, and I think that's a really important area we need to look at. And unfortunately, we saw that kind of over 2 years ago with the attempted assassination of the Prime Minister Fico. So I think it's a challenging space, the political discourse and environment, and I think increasingly polarized as well. I think if across the world there's more polarization in politics. So I think there's a risk that can be put young people off, and they don't understand kind of why the politics matters to them. But I think, you know, politics doesn't have to be party political. You know, I think you know, ultimately politics is about, and politicians are there to serve their people, to make laws, to make the lives better of their citizens. So I think if young people view it in that way and to think about how they can help shape some of that, whether it's maybe through directly being involved in politics, or it might be through kind of civil society organisation. You know, I think there's ways in which they can get involved. But I think what I would encourage young people to do is just, you know, ask questions and kind of learn about it and be curious. And of course, you may still feel frustrated and feel like it's not for you, but you know, I think it's better to be engaged than disengaged, because it affects your life.
What's the one political questions you always get from young people in Slovakia?
A political question? I guess Brexit comes up quite a lot. I think there's kind of curiosity about...
What's the greatest misconceptions that Slovaks would have toward the UK?
Of the UK, the greatest misconception? It's a difficult one. I don't know.
If there aren't any, that's good news.
Yeah, I don't think there are really. I think what I find is sometimes a curiosity about the UK, about like the beginning of this interview, you were talking about my heritage. You know, I'm from Pakistani heritage, from Northern Ireland, so the UK is kind of quite diverse in terms of, you know, where people come from. So I think that's kind of not a misconception, but I think people are very curious about, you know, the diversity of the UK. But equally, you know, what I've discovered living and traveling across Slovakia is a very diverse country. So, you know, if I speak to, you know, friends who've never visited here or years ago, there might be one perception of Slovakia, but actually it's a much more diverse and interesting and colourful country than people might think.
And what was your greatest misconception when it comes to Slovakia, you know,
Yeah.
you did have a picture of Slovakia before coming
Mm-hmm.
here, and in what way were you wrong?
I was pleasantly surprised at just how kind of diverse Slovakia is in terms of kind of the culture, the people, the traditions, and it's fantastic to be here at this festival today to learn more about kind of the Hungarian minority living in Slovakia. I've been to the east. I've been to communities like Lunik Devit, where was a large Roma community, and so you know I've been pleasantly surprised, and I think it's really important for me to get out of the Bratislava bubble and kind of explore the beauty of Slovakia. So I always kind of knew and read about it, but I think until you see it na živo, I think that's kind of the most important thing.
Is there a typical place or town or landscape or whatever that you found especially good for you, or that you grew fond of?
Yeah, so I love the outdoors. So because I'm from Northern Ireland, I kind of love being outside and exploring nature. So I've really enjoyed visiting Niski Tatry and Vysoki Tatry and kind of the mountains, both in the summertime recently for kind of tourist hikes, so Jumbier, but then the winter skiing. So normally that was my first time kind of skiing in Slovakia this past winter. So normally I would have gone to maybe Switzerland or France or Italy, but it was a really enjoyable experience kind of skiing in Slovakia. And actually my godson, he's 2 years old and he's from Wales actually, and he visited with his mum and dad and we took him skiing, and his first time ever skiing was in Slovakia, so he learned to ski in Slovakia.
Yeah, because people tend to see ambassadors in a formal setting usually. What is the part of your work that people rarely see?
I mean, I suppose, it's a formal setting. But a lot of the times it's got meetings with ministers, and of course the meetings can be private, and people don't always kind of see those discussions behind the scenes. But yeah, kind of, ambassadors, diplomats, we're human beings. We have interests outside of work. So I think that's really important. I think for anybody, regardless of what kind of field you work in, is you do have a life outside of work. Of course, I'm here to represent my country, but I have my own car, so I'm able to travel by myself and discover different parts of this world. What was quite funny was, and we'll see, I just arrived here at Gombaszög, but I was in Pohoda last Friday in a non-official capacity, so I went kind of incognito, just kind of wearing, normal clothes and just kind of whatever. But then people were like then coming up and saying hello. So it's people I knew from Bratislava, from Košice, from all over the country. So Slovakia, it's a small place, so definitely you don't know who you'll bump into.
Okay, so I suppose you liked Pohoda, and if you're to compare Gombaszög to Pohoda, I know that you only spent a couple of minutes before our discussions here, but how would you compare these two?
Well, I guess kind of physically, it's incredible space. Kind of with the trees and the covered spaces, it's really comfortable. Pohoda is obviously in the airfield, so very open. I think it seems very family friendly. Both festivals, which is great to see so many kind of young people, older people, kids. I think one thing that's quite good, what I just learnt, is that Gombaszög is almost 100 years old. So it was established in 1928. So in 2 years' time, you will have your 100-year anniversary, whereas Pohoda celebrated 30 years. So a funny joke, sometimes people, when I told them I was coming to the festival today, they were like, oh, it's like kind of Ako Menye Pohoda. It's like small Pohoda. It's like, but now I can go back to them and say, actually, did you know that this festival is almost 100 years old? And maybe Pohoda was inspired by my Gombaszög.
Maybe Pohada is a small Gombaszög, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Are you always an ambassador? Are you an ambassador 24/7, or do you have time off, or can you have time off, or you're always representing your country in any situation?
I mean, obviously, when I'm in country, yes, kind of, officially speaking, and maybe legally, yes, I am. But of course, I think kind of I think what's behind your question is, do I have time to switch off? Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And I would say that I also have a very good network of